Live stream again. Here we are.
Okay.
Good morning or good afternoon. For some of you who are joining us from outside the US, good evening. I am Theresa Agresta, co-founder at CultureTalk, and I am joined today by Cynthia Forstmann, who is my co-founder, my business partner, and my sister.
One up.
One up, right. We are here from Culture Talk, and if you are new to our conversation, Culture Talk is a platform and a system that gives leaders and teams an opportunity to make culture into a tangible asset so that you can design, align, and transform your culture with intention. Here on LinkedIn, we focus on the business of culture. And we have conversations that help you to understand and to see how the culture in your organization is just as valuable as your financial results, and how you can use it as a tool to really drive business outcomes. So that's what we talk about. And today we're going to focus on a specific topic. We're glad you've joined us here to talk about the remote workplace. So Cynthia, tell us where we're going.
Cool. So today is actually the second conversation we're having on remote work. And I think before we dive in, it's worth noting that the conversation around remote versus return to the office is pretty heated right now. You know, there was a time a couple of years ago when we were sent home to work during the pandemic, and it was all about being efficient. Then in the past 5 years, we've focused on what are the best practices around remote work, like how do you do operations and communications and team building. Today, we've got, I think it's a study came out that said 83% of CEOs anticipate being back in the office in the next 3 years. And compare that to another study by University of Pittsburgh that says when we do return to the office, we have brain drain. Kind of our best and brightest people drop out and go find new jobs. So it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle. It's kind of like the modern workday puzzle, and that creates a lot of uncertainty and a lot of tension between leaders and teams. So just again, Theresa and I are not here to solve that. And we're also not here to talk about best practices. We are here instead to talk about how does the unique aspects of your culture help you do remote and do it well.
Right. Because when you've got tactics, and they're great, right? We have lots of tactics available to us. You can Google that and get lots of detail and information about specific tactics. But how do you customize that to how you behave and how you define, success in your own organization? So that makes culture even more important. It's kind of imperative that we have clarity when we have, essentially a lot of confusion out there about how to behave in this hybrid or remote workplace. So gaining that clarity about your culture can be a huge driver for your success. And I think another important thing is making sure that your leaders are really in charge of this, like setting the stage. It's critical in this conversation that leaders are setting the stage and leading this conversation about your remote work culture. So we have a shortcut. You've been hanging around us for any amount of time. You might not be surprised to learn it's based on the narrative intelligence of the 12 archetype system. And the reason we like to lean into culture, and in particular into the narrative of archetype, is because it allows teams to talk about what is otherwise intangible. And by being able to talk about it, we can also set strategy around it. We can align behavior to it. And so being able to address this, conundrum that many, many organizations find themselves in, this gives you an opportunity to start experiencing some specific successes, especially tied to your own unique culture. So where do we find the clues? How do you know how to use this shortcut we're talking about? I think sometimes they are hidden right in the remote practices and policies themselves. So let's dig into a handful of them so we can kind of bring this to life so you can experience it. And we'd love to hear your
Yep.
questions.
Yeah.
Throw any questions that you have in the chat as we go, because I think that really tying this back to your own experiences and getting your questions out there will be super helpful.
And as we go through, Theresa and I are going to tour 4 different cultural archetypes. Listen, I mean, do you hear the differences? Because that's really what we're trying to point to here, is that culturally there are differences, and you can set yourself up for success based on your culture. So I'm going to start with an archetype called the ruler. And just like the name sounds, this is a culture that is really good at establishing and maintaining and enforcing rules. So things like the structure of your day, when you're expected to be on a call in a meeting and it's mandatory, maybe it's even mandatory that you're going to put your camera on. Things like getting big projects done and how do we break them down incrementally. The ruler's going to have lots of order around. A culture with a high ruler is going to have a lot of order around those things. It's also going to have, communication norms. It's going to have who do you need to talk to when. It's going to have the tools you need, right? Because that personal accountability and getting the job done and moving towards big things are all things that the ruler culture is really good at. Theresa and I were joking around. We said this is kind of like remote strict, right? It's a remote strict culture, and there's a beauty in knowing what's expected.
Right. Remote clear might be another way of stating that. Everything is clearly laid out.
Yeah, there's a beauty in knowing what to expect. And also, a ruler culture needs to be careful because it can become micromanaging. And it actually can kind of be counterintuitive to some of the things that we love about remote work, like flexibility, right? So you might feel like a little bit less flexibility. So if that sounded like your culture, if some of those clues, how do you be effective as a ruler culture? One idea is before you establish the rules and the norms, get input. Have a meeting, talk about what people expect, what they want, so that there is an opportunity for people to weigh in on how things are going to go. And then review them. Let's roll it out for a month. Is it working? Don't just keep blindly following the rules. Have a little flexibility played into your rulemaking system.
Right. I think oftentimes in a ruler culture, the leaders get such a hold of the structure that's been created that it can be hard to loosen their grip. So as a leader in a ruler culture, sort of exercising that muscle of letting go a little bit, releasing grip, loosening up the standards or the expectations once in a while, and listening. I think all those things are great advice.
Yeah, and building that flexibility into how you're making and applying the rules, or shifting the rules, if you will. So just some ideas if you resonate with a ruler. Theresa, give us another culture type.
All right, let's move on to one we see a lot of. Well, let's talk about the hero culture and what happens when the hero is working in a remote environment. In a hero culture, expectations kind of lean more into get her done. It might mean working at all hours. It might mean doing things at any cost, but the goal is to get to the finish line and to get things done. So if you find that that's kind of the mode of operation at your organization, here's some clues that might, help you to see that. If you're all about meeting deadlines, meeting goals, and a sense of, striving for excellence all the time, always raising the bar, where the work, where you work, where people are work, and when they work, is way less important. So think about that ruler culture where everything is strictly outlined. Nobody's got time to focus on all those details in the hero culture. They just want to keep things going. So there's this, sense of constant movement and momentum. Winning is important. So winners are what get noticed and also rewarded. And so long as you're delivering, then that is really the most important piece in this organization. So how might you operate in a remote world to help you overcome some of the challenges? So leaders in this environment tend to really focus on high performers, which means that people who are working in a support role or people who might be new to the organization or new to their role might kind of be, reduced in what the amount of airtime they get, the visibility that they get, and the attention that they get to be productive and effective in their roles. So you're going to have to really, err on the side of reaching out more than you think they might need. So remember, this culture doesn't prioritize that, focus on structure. So these folks might need more structure and more support, and you're going to need to err on the side of reaching out to them more frequently. When you do, those one-on-one individual meetings with folks in a hero organization should really help people focus on their individual goals and help them to see and celebrate their personal wins. So you want to make sure that people are tied to that winning culture and they're seeing their own success moving in lockstep with the success of the organization. You don't want anybody doubting their own ability to get the job done quietly in their office, but you need to be able to continue to tie their work plan to meeting those deadlines and incremental steps along the way. And then also, because things are always moving so fast, because we're focused on the big, bold moves the organization's making, out of sight can kind of lead to out of mind. So when you have those employees, again, who are working from remote locations, most of the time they're home, there may be sort of fewer meetings on the calendar, less structure. So we might want to add a few at a regular cadence, more than we might feel naturally inclined to in this organization, more than might feel comfortable, might not be popular. Again, might sound a little counterintuitive to what's the norm in the culture, but it will help the leaders to spot problem projects or issues, between teams early. And in good news, the hero culture is really good at finding the problem and quickly addressing it. So, couple of tips and tricks. If you're
Yeah, I'm just noting the difference between ruler having high structure that they need to lighten up a little bit, hero having very light structure and maybe needing to tighten that a little bit. I also want to comment because I had a conversation with somebody this week who I think may be in one of those hero cultures, and they were waiting for a one-on-one meeting with their boss. And that meeting kept getting pushed off. Like maybe he's calling at noon or maybe 2 or maybe 4. And finally the call comes in at 6 and that person was in a car at an event, like driving. Now you're trying to have an important conversation and they're on the move, so that kind of thing does really impact people. Let's jump to another archetype, the every person, which also has very distinct cultural aspects. And kind of the hallmark of an every person culture is inclusivity and fairness. So expectations should be the same across the globe, across the roles of the employees. We want everybody to be following the same rules, if you will, no exceptions.
If you don't, people will let you know about it, right? So they will up and saying, "Hey, that's not fair."
Right. High cut, maybe kind of a culture where we complain a little bit.
Hmm.
When we communicate in an every person culture, perhaps it's like overdone. Like we have copied everybody in the organization, everybody on the team has gotten a BCC about something. Everyone's been tagged on the Slack team because we want to keep everybody in the loop about everything. And sometimes it can just be darn slow, right? Like when you're trying to move kind of the whole group along through a project, through a communication, when you're trying to get buy-in continually and you're not seeing each other face to face,
Right.
that can become really challenging. It can wear on people's patience, right? When are we going to make a decision about this thing? It seems like progress can be halted. So if you see some of those clues about how you communicate and how you apply rules, maybe perhaps you're in an every person organization where we're all the same. So how do you flip that, and how do you remotely manage to the strength of that cultural pattern? One thing is that you probably want to establish some central location where we keep everything, so everybody has access to everything. But within that, you also want to establish clear guidelines about, you have a deadline for when something is due. You have, and if you don't weigh in by then, you're out. We're not going to count your opinion. You might also want to have a lot of clarity around who has the authority to move forward. We
Yeah, I
weighed
think that's a really important. Yeah.
we brought it into our equation, and okay, somebody has to make the decision, right? So making sure that you do that. And also when it comes to the team and really thinking about team accomplishment, because we all want to be recognized in that culture, think about how do you have celebration of what the team has accomplished together. So
Right.
the team wins, make them fun and relaxed, and also draw attention in those team wins to each person's contribution. So it's not always a focus on all of us, but sometimes we can, as individuals, also be called out for our unique contributions. That would be a plus.
Yeah,
And
and I think another thing that's really important is to make sure that everybody is there, right? So in an every person organization, it's all for one, one for all, and democratizing access to that team celebration, I think, is super important as well.
yeah, so it should be convenient for most, right?
Right.
That enough people can get there.
Right. We all know we're all working with those time clocks these days. If we're working in a remote environment, how many time zones are we working in? But it's important to, and especially in that environment.
Yeah. And then I would also point to one last thing, and that is that maybe you're hybrid, and maybe there's some people working remotely, there's some people working in the office. So there's going to be some inherent kind of unequalness. Maybe somebody has to commute, or maybe someone isn't there for an in-person thing. So just being, careful that whatever extra perks are perceived that Group A or Group B has, that you're doing your best to even them out and to level the playing field in a really public way.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I can hear the differences now between the hero, right, where we're focused on the winner, and the every person, where we're focused on the perception of everyone being a winner, everyone having fair access.
And the challenge of, in one culture, some people are not getting attention, right? And in the other culture, everybody's getting
Everybody's getting
attention,
attention.
and
Mhm.
that's causing the problem. So interesting. It's just
Yeah.
interesting. Culture is different. Let's look at one more, Theresa.
All
One
right.
different culture.
So we saved the fun one for last. What if you are working in a place that we'll call the jester culture? Um, so, you know, this is a place where all of those policies might be viewed a little bit more like guidelines.
Optional.
Optional, exactly. If your guidelines establish ease and accommodate flexibility, then your employees will be all in, and they will really tap into their own innate sense of motivation to maximize productivity. So it's a place where things get done, but in a relaxed, more easeful way. So if you're doing that and you're allowing people to kind of march to the beat of their own drum, then great. If, however, your rules constrain people, start showing up more like they did in that ruler environment where people have a particular time or a particular way that things need to get done, well, then people in a gesture environment might just ignore them. And you might find that contrary to the guidelines, they've gone off to do their errands during the work day. So it's important to understand, if your culture shows up as a jester, that a leader doesn't want to come down with a set of rules that, could have been applied in a ruler organization. So when you've got that relaxed kind of focus, and your employees are making the progress as they should, here's some things that you might do to support effectiveness for remote. So do schedule mandatory virtual meetings, but because we do need structure, and we do need to make sure that, how we have check-ins with people, but those meetings should be relaxed and engaging. They should be fun, maybe good, ample amount of time allowed at the beginning of that meeting for informal conversation. What'd you do over the weekend? What are the personal goals that you have this week that you're going to accomplish alongside of the project goals we're about to talk about? So really personalizing it before diving straight into work. Again, juxtaposed to the hero organization, which just business, productivity, straight down to business, that wouldn't be tolerated. But in a gesture organization, you kind of need that go with the flow feeling for people to, to feel like they can operate at a comfortable speed.
You're actually going to maximize their input by providing that time for a little bit of balance.
Exactly. Balance is a great word. Then I would say another thing is gamify things. Get a little co-opetition going on. It creates some banter. It creates a healthy sense of connection between employees. And those are the kind of things that make it fun to be part of the organization. So again, in other organizations where we might say, well, I don't want to, that's extra time or energy I got to focus. In this organization, it will move you forward. So trying to find ways to make things fun, to actually, gamify things will be a welcome aspect in this environment.
I actually love that, just because I'm trying now to imagine how another culture might respond to that gamification and find it put on, inauthentic. And I do think that's like, we see a lot of that, and games are fun, but they have to be done in lockstep with what that cultural pattern will allow and bring in.
Right. I think that, focus on authenticity, what feels authentic, is kind of true to this whole conversation. It's what are the practices that are going to help us to be most successful, but also feel like they're an authentic expression of how we behave and how we want to interact. So I think that's a great way of thinking about it. Another thing in a gesture organization is there is a healthy work-life balance. There is this sense of we can, create a serious product, a service, or get work done and do what we need to do, and we can have fun while we're doing it, and we can go home on time. So when you see people who are doing a good job creating that balance, recognize and reward them, kind of hold it up for the rest of the office to see. This is the behavior and the balance that we want to create in this organization. And when people can see that that's what we reward, then they'll kind of embrace both sides of that equation, and they'll do it really authentically, as opposed to feeling pushed or forced into it. And then one final thing with gesture culture, there's lots of things they're good at, but one thing we'll talk about is in this organization, there is a willingness for leaders to listen when employees speak up, sort of the ability to speak truth to power, to bring my authentic observations, whether they be complaints, good things, bad things, but to come with the truth. And so when things need to shift or change in this organization, just remember that that's a strength. The ability to point out what's not working and to do it in a direct way that doesn't need to be confrontational. It almost makes it easier for everybody because they're being direct and specific about what they see. So that can be something that leaders really embrace in the jester culture.
It's fascinating. I'm curious, for anyone listening in now or later, do any of these four patterns resonate for you? Are you living and working or maybe supporting a client that has cultural patterns that are resonant with ruler, hero, every person, or jester? Here's the thing, there are 12 archetypes in our system, and every organization has a couple, right, that are really prevalent. So you might be in an organization that's a hero, ruler, jester, and that might feel different than an every person, jester, caregiver organization. So I hope you can catch through these examples we've given you how working remotely can be maximized differently in different cultures. So for us, the question right now, the debate, we don't know where it's going to land. And the question for us is not to remote or not to remote. The question is, how do you remote well? How do you make remote work in the very specific, unique cultural sense of your own company and your own organization? It can be done. You can build culture remotely. You can celebrate culture remotely. You can shift culture remotely. It takes intention. It takes focus. And it takes not just taking every best practice and blindly rolling out a best practice, but really understanding what's going to work in this culture and what do we need.
And where do we need to shift? Yeah. So where do we need to be flexible, open, listening, and shifting until we land? And when you land, I think you can hear, even from just a handful of these examples, that you can really dial into something that, increases your outcomes and your productivity, because that's what culture can do for you.
Right. It's not just to feel good. It's not like we want a remote culture that feels good. We want a remote culture that gets results. And what works in one culture is going to be very different than what works in another culture. So that's our thoughts for today. We know it's a holiday month. We're signing off for the month. We're wishing you not working, but from LinkedIn. And we'd love to hear from you if you have thoughts around culture at remote work, if you want to learn a little bit more about some of those other patterns and what are the idiosyncrasies of different cultural patterns. If you want to hear how you might take these ideas and apply them in your own business or with your clients, we'd love to hear from you. Isabel, I think you're going to pop a link to my Calendly into the chat. You can also reach out to either Theresa or I on LinkedIn with a direct message.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. We wish you a wonderful holiday season and hope to hear from some of you soon.
All right. Happy 2025.
Bye-bye.